Hello and welcome to today's episode. Um, just a little warning, this episode is going to be raw. I have kind of said my story quite a few times about when I got the eating disorder and through my life and then went through recovery and why I do what I do. But I've never really gone in to the actual recovery. So this is not a teaching episode. It's not a here are five tips to help your recovery kind of episode. This is my truth, the full, unfiltered story of my recovery. From the very darkest place I've ever been, all the way through to the quiet freedom I live in now. It's going to be difficult for me to say it all, so bear with me. There might be some strange gaps. I might cry. But I think I just want to say, if you're listening to this and you're struggling, really struggling, I guess I need you to know that I've been there. I understand. Not I had a hard time once, but I've really been there. At the point where I genuinely believed my family would be better off without me, where I wrote goodbye letters, where I held a bottle of something I knew would kill me, where I walked into the woods intending to never come back. I didn't think recovery was possible for someone like me. I thought I'd gone too far, waited too long, was too deeply broken. I thought it was too late. But I was wrong. Now, before we go any further, I just want to say something really clearly. I am not sharing my story to scare you. I'm not telling you how hard it is so that you'll compare it to your own. And I'm definitely not trying to frighten anyone off recovery. Because recovery, despite everything that you're going to hear in this episode, recovery has been the most transformational thing I have ever done. It gave me back my life. No, actually, it gave me a life I'd never had before. I have lived more, laughed more, loved more, and felt more in the years since recovering than I did in my entire life before. And I don't regret a single second of it. Not even the messy bits, not even the painful bits. So if you're listening and you're somewhere in the middle of it, or just staring at the starting line, I just want to say it is worth it. Even when it feels impossible, even when it feels like everything is breaking apart. Because sometimes things have to break before they become something beautiful. This story won't give you a clean timeline and it won't wrap everything up with a bow. It is messy, human, and emotional. And that's why I want to share it, because so often the stories we hear about recovery feel like they skip over the pain, the shame, the part where it's hard to even want to live, let alone eat. This episode is for the version of you who feels completely alone in it. The one who's trying so hard to look okay on the outside, but inside is holding everything together with a thread. The one who's terrified to eat, terrified not to eat, and can't imagine ever feeling free again. If that's you, I want you to know there is a way through. Not overnight, not perfectly, but fully. This is the story of how I found that path. Not in a treatment room or on a structured, perfect recovery plan, but in the woods, on the floor, in the silence, and eventually in love. Let me take you back to the moment everything changed. There's a moment in many recovery stories where something breaks. For me, it didn't happen in public. It wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was quiet, almost invisible, but it was the moment everything started to unravel. On the outside, I looked like, or at least I thought I looked like I was still holding it together. I was doing what needed to be done. School runs, work, appointments, life. But inside, I was completely gone. My eating disorder, because I thought it was my identity then, now I would say the eating disorder, but then it was my eating disorder. It had stopped being a coping mechanism and started feeling like prison, a tight, inescapable one. And the pain I'd been working so hard to outrun had finally caught up with me. 6 months earlier, my father had died, and something shifted in me. I didn't know how to name it at the time. My dad had been a complicated man. He wasn't someone I turned to for comfort. Emotions weren't safe or welcome around him. He didn't even need to say it directly. It was something I'd absorbed over time. I'd learned that vulnerability was weakness, that crying made you a problem, that being strong meant staying silent, pushing through, and not ever letting anyone see you fall apart. I'd built my life around those beliefs, and when he passed away, I wasn't just grieving him. I was grieving a version of myself I'd constructed to survive. His death didn't take away protection, it took away the last layer of emotional suppression. Without him there, all the feelings I'd held down for so long started to rise, slowly at first and then all at once. And restriction, the one thing that always kept those feelings buried, wasn't working anymore. I was tired. I was completely and utterly exhausted, not just physically, but on a soul level. And I had got to the point where I felt I couldn't do it anymore. I sat down and I wrote goodbye letters to my husband, to each of my children. I told them I loved them and that I was sorry and that they'd be better off without me. And at the time, I truly believed that that was the most loving thing I could do. Then I took a bottle of gin, something that I am severely allergic to, and walked into the woods. I wasn't crying, I wasn't panicking, I was numb, detached from myself, from reality, from everything. I sat down on a fallen tree, twisted the bottle off the cap and held it in my hands. I was ready. And then out of nowhere, I heard it. Their voices, my children in my head, loud, fierce, and unmistakable. How dare you? How fucking dare you? This is the most selfish thing you've ever thought of doing. And it hit me like a punch to the chest. My hands started shaking, my throat closed, and I couldn't breathe. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt something. Not numbness, not control, I felt love. Love for them. A messy, gut-wrenching, life-saving love. The kind of love that jolts you awake. I dropped the bottle and I sat there shaking, breathing, listening to the echo of their voices in my mind, and I knew I couldn't do it. Somehow I made it home, and when I did something I've never done in my life. I asked for help. I messaged a couple of close friends. The words were quite small, really, quiet, insignificant, but massive to me. I just wrote, I need help. And I felt ashamed, weak, and exposed because I built my whole identity around not needing anyone. I was the strong one, the one who coped, the one who held it together for everyone else. And I didn't realize at the time that asking for help wasn't failure. And I certainly didn't know that it was my first act of freedom. 2 weeks later, I sat at the kitchen table across from my husband, I hadn't told him any of it. He had no idea how close he'd come to losing me, and I couldn't look him in the eye. My stomach was twisted into knots. My hands were clenched in my lap, and I felt like I was going to break open. And then I said, I need to talk to you, but you have to listen and you can't fix me. And then that's when it came, the sobbing, the quiet, the kind of sobbing that takes over your whole body. Loud, ugly, and unstoppable. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't stop. I was gasping, I was trying to speak, but I was choking on the tears. They were streaming, the snot was everywhere, and my whole body was shaking. And I cried like I haven't cried in decades, because actually I hadn't. And this wasn't just about that moment in the woods. It was about every year I'd spent performing, trying to be the strong one. Every time I'd silenced myself, every time I'd swallowed emotion to protect everyone else. And he just sat with me. He didn't try and fix it. He didn't try and stop it. He just stayed, tears rolling down his face. Quiet, present. And in that collapse, in the sobbing and the snot and the gasping and the grief, I finally stopped performing. And that was the beginning. Not of eating more or challenging fear foods, but of truth, of softness, of letting myself be human. Everything started from there. After the woods, after the sobbing, after telling my husband, I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed more than love. I needed more than willpower. I needed help. My friend stepped in and helped me to book a private therapy session, and I also went to the GP. And I really wanted to believe that this would lead somewhere, but it didn't. That therapist saw me twice and then told me very directly that he couldn't help me. He didn't know anything about eating disorders. He admitted that. And as honest as that was, it left me gutted. I already felt like I was failing at life, and now a professional had basically confirmed what I feared most. You're too much. No one knows what to do with you. I could have shut down there, and I nearly did. But some small voice in me said, keep going. So I found another therapist. And this time there was something. She did help, at least a bit. She introduced me to the idea that there were different parts of myself, that there wasn't just one voice in my head, but many. Some scared, some angry, some protective, some that just needed to be heard. And she gave me a little bit of accountability around food, enough to keep me from slipping even deeper. But even with all that, I was feeling stuck, and I was feeling held back because she kept telling me I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready for inner child work or to go deeper emotionally. I wasn't ready to look at the roots of why this had happened in the first place. And every time I started to feel something stirring, something real, something tender, she pulled me back. You're not ready for that yet, she'd say. And I started to believe her. But also deep down, the part of me knew that I was ready enough. And then she told me, and my husband actually, that she was worried that if I ate more freely, I might develop binge eating disorder. And that was it. I was already terrified of eating. I didn't need more fear layered on top of that. I needed permission, I needed safety, and I needed someone to say, yes, this is what recovery looks like. It's hard, but it's necessary. Instead, I felt like I was being told to stay in the shallow end when I was already drowning. So I stopped. Not because she was bad, but because I knew I needed something else, something deeper, something braver, and someone who wouldn't hold me back, but hold me through it. And while all this was happening, I was also waiting because after seeing my GP, I'd been referred to the NHS eating disorder services and I was put on the waiting list. And I still remember when the letter came, it felt like hope, like maybe someone was going to catch me. But when I opened it and I saw that in actual fact, that was just a letter telling me that the waiting list was really long and that they would contact me when I reached the top of it. It was horrendous, and I'm not here to criticise the NHS. I know how hard the people inside the system work. I know how much they care. But the truth is the system is underfunded, overstretched and overwhelmed. The need is enormous and the resources aren't there to meet it. And so many people are slipping through the cracks. Not because no one wants to help, but that help simply doesn't come fast enough. And when you're in crisis, waiting doesn't feel neutral. It feels like drowning in slow motion. And I couldn't afford to wait any longer. Incidentally, the first appointment finally came through 3 years later. But at this point, I made a decision. It wasn't brave or bold, it just felt really necessary. I needed to understand, I needed to learn more, and I needed to find another way. Because I didn't know if I'd still be here by the time I'd reached the top of that waiting list. At that point, I was still barely functioning. Physically, I was exhausted, and mentally, I felt like I was fraying at the edges. I felt stuck between not being able to live like this and not quite knowing how to change. I actually thought that I could just hand the eating disorder over to somebody else and then fix it and then give it back and everything would be fine. How naive. My husband, watching me come undone, had quietly booked a holiday. Just the two of us. He said it wasn't a fix, just space, away from routine, away from expectations, and away from the noise of normal life. And I did not want to go. The idea of eating out, of being seen, of being out of control, felt terrifying. And by the time the holiday came, I was completely disconnected. Everything felt hazy, distant, like I was floating outside of my own life, and I really didn't want to go. The idea of being away from home, away from control and the familiar, just fucking terrified me. But I went, because part of me knew I needed space, and because I wasn't strong enough to say no, and because my husband quietly and gently made it happen. We arrived, and I was there, but I was not present. I was like a walking zombie, completely shut down, terrified of everything and frozen inside myself. I couldn't make a single decision, not what to eat, not where to sit, not even whether I wanted to be inside or outside. My husband had to gently guide me from one thing to the next. I was like a child, and it was humiliating in some ways, but it also felt safe, and for once I wasn't pretending. I was just being exactly as I was, which was overwhelmed, exhausted, and I thought I was completely broken. And in that stillness, excuse me. I knew this was going to be an emotional one. And in that stillness, something strange started to happen. I didn't feel hunger at all. I didn't believe I ever felt hungry. But there was one thing that was just really weird. At the buffet, there were these odd little discs, like flat, round, a little bit chewy, kind of nutty and sweet, almost toffee-like. They kind of reminded me of Florentines, but without the chocolate. And for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about them. I let myself have one, tentatively, felt all the guilt and all the horrendous feelings afterwards. And then I had another one. And then they became a thing, something I looked for, weirdly kind of craved and obsessively thought about. And it terrified me. I didn't understand why. I wasn't hungry. Why did I want them? Why couldn't I stop thinking about them? And I thought I was losing control, that something dangerous was happening. But looking back, it makes perfect sense. My body was starving, starving not just for food, but for exactly that kind of food. Calorie dense, sweet, fatty, nourishing. Exactly what a biologically deprived body would long for. So it was my biology, not my brokenness. And in a strange way, those nutty little discs were one of the first signs that my body hadn't given up on me. That underneath all the fear and the numbness, I was still trying to survive. I didn't really understand it at the time. I just knew it scared me. But it was also something else, like a flicker of aliveness, a movement forward, something I hadn't felt in a really long time. And in the quiet hours between the fear and the food and the being guided around by my husband, I read. I read everything I could get my hands on. Articles, blog posts, books, research about eating disorders, about trauma, about our brains, the nervous system, belief system, inner child work, neuroplasticity. I was desperately trying to understand why I was like this, why I was so scared, so empty, so stuck, why the tiniest bit of nourishment felt like a threat. And for the first time, something clicked. It wasn't just about control or food or weight. It was about pain, protection, and disconnection. And maybe I wasn't truly broken. Maybe I'd just been trying to survive the only way I knew how. I didn't come home healed at all. I didn't come home strong. But I did come home a bit different, a little bit more awake, aware that something in me was worth saving, and that if anyone was going to do that saving, it had to start with me. Recovery didn't feel like freedom at first. It felt like hell. By the time I started working with my first coach, I'd already tried so many things. Therapy, research, reading. But this was the first time someone really held me accountable for food, for consistency, for choices I made every day. And I was ready, not because I felt strong, but because I was willing to let her voice be louder than the fear. She really helped me with the eating. She helped me start letting go of compulsive movement. She gave me structure, and for the first time I stuck to it. I always had been inherently a people pleaser, and so when somebody was telling me what to do, I wanted to please them. I wanted to do it right. But the moment I began eating enough, really enough, my body reacted. Edema hit me hard. I wasn't prepared for it. Nothing had warned me what it would feel like to suddenly balloon with water retention. I felt like I was filling up from the inside out. Swollen, puffy, tight, hot. My skin itched constantly. I would be clawing at my legs and my arms and my stomach in the night, desperately trying to escape my own body. I really wanted to crawl out of my skin. I felt completely suffocated by it. And the diarrhea was relentless. Everyone talks about constipation in recovery, but I had absolutely the opposite. I couldn't keep anything in. My stomach was in knots all day, every day. Honestly, the gastric distress was overwhelming. I had no energy, no clarity, and no peace. I had stopped all movement because I knew I had to, but that made everything worse in my head. I felt like I was losing control, like I was doing everything right and getting it all wrong, and the mental pain was just as bad. I would sit at the table, fork in my hand, with tears streaming down my face, trying to chew, trying to swallow, even though it felt like rocks, trying to act like I was okay, whilst everything inside me was screaming. And my family sat with me. They tried to keep the atmosphere light, talking about their days, passing the salt, pretending everything was normal. But even as I sat at the other end of the table, the tears dropping onto my plate, I will never forget the look on their faces, the pain in their eyes and the helplessness, the hope. Sometimes they'd say, "Come on, Mum, you can do it, just a bit more." And at one point, my youngest, Finn, picked up a fork because I wasn't eating. He just put some food on the fork and said, "Right, Mum, here comes the aeroplane," like I was a toddler again. And I laughed. Through the tears and the snot and the shame, I laughed. And in that moment, something softened and cracked open just a little bit. But underneath, there was still so much shame, not just about eating, but about my body, the swelling, the softness, the fullness, the way I couldn't bear to see myself. I flinched away from mirrors. I couldn't bring myself to try on clothes. Nothing fitted, but I couldn't face going shopping. I ordered stuff online because the thought of being in the changing room, of needing bigger sizes, of being seen, it was too much. And the food cravings started coming in waves. All the foods I'd forbidden for years, all the ones I'd labelled bad, unhealthy, dangerous, and now I wanted them, and I wanted so much of them. And I felt like an addict, and I felt completely out of control. But really, my body was just catching up. It was trying to survive, trying to heal, trying to trust that it was finally allowed to ask for what it needed. And I was trying to let it. But it did feel unbearable. Every bite would come with tears, and the shame made me want to disappear. But I stayed, because somewhere in the middle of all the chaos, I knew that this was part of it. This was recovery, and I wasn't going back. It really was do or die for me. So I did everything I was supposed to do. I was eating. I was resting, not exercising. I was following the plan, showing up and trusting the process. I had let go of restriction. I had surrendered control, and I was still so terrified. My body had become everything that I had feared. Bigger, rounder, softer, visibly changed. And I was still me. The fear hadn't gone away. The shame still lived under my skin, and the anxiety still wrapped around me like a second layer of clothing, strangling me. And it wasn't about food, not really. It wasn't about movement either, because they were just symptoms, coping strategies, surface level attempts to control the chaos inside. The real work was underneath, and I didn't know how to do that work, not yet. So I clung to recovery podcasts like lifelines. I kept listening and searching for a voice, a clue, a key. And one day I heard a coach talking about the things I'd never heard in that context before. She spoke about self-love, not fluffy Instagram quote kind of self-love, but in the raw, lived, uncomfortable kind of way. She spoke about codependent mother and daughter relationships, patterns of emotional entanglement and self-erasure that I'd never had the words for. But I could feel them in me like truth. And it felt like she was talking about me. Things I'd felt but never named. Things I'd carried without ever realizing they were burdens I could put down. And I reached out. Working with her changed everything. We didn't start with food. We started with feeling, with learning how to sit with discomfort, with meeting the younger parts of myself that were still frozen in fear. with allowing myself to name what had never been spoken. Oh, excuse me. She helped me begin the slow, clumsy, sacred work of self-compassion, of peeling back the layers and unlearning the belief that I had to be perfect to be loved. And for the first time, recovery wasn't just about getting out of the eating disorder. It was about finding my way back to myself. And this was the beginning of real healing, messy, painful, and beautiful. And it was the first time I truly believed that maybe I didn't have to live in fear forever. Maybe I can be free. And it would be so easy now to wrap this up in a neat little bow and say, I found the right coach, I did the inner work, I healed, the end. But it's not the truth. Recovery is never linear. It's messy, it's circular. It's one step forward, 3 steps back, and then a lurch sideways into something you didn't even know needed healing. And yes, the emotional work began to shift things, but it cracked me wide open. And once I was open, everything I'd spent a lifetime avoiding came rushing to the surface. And there were moments, sharp, sudden moments, where a single comment could bring it all crashing back down. Like the time my husband made an offhand remark about my portion size. He didn't mean it in any cruel way, but my brain heard it through the filter of every fear I'd ever had, and I crashed. Restriction rushed back in like a reflex. The old coping strategies didn't knock, they broke the bloody door down. There were nights I stood in front of the mirror, barely able to look. My reflection was unfamiliar. It was soft, round, alive, and I would sob. Not graceful tears down the cheek, but full-body, breathless, gut-wrenching, snotty sobs. And even though I knew I was healing, I didn't always feel it. Because I sometimes just felt like I was losing, and I was grieving the old armour and facing all the things I thought recovery would protect me from, realising I had to feel them now. The deeper work didn't stop at food or self-talk. I started to see patterns, old patterns, rooted ones, people-pleasing, perfectionism, hyper-independence, over-functioning. I had spent my entire life trying to be whoever I thought other people needed me to be, saying yes when I wanted to say no, smiling when I felt broken inside, and shrinking myself so I wouldn't be rejected. And recovery meant confronting all of that. Meant learning to say no, to disappoint people, to not be the good girl, and to stop fixing, stop overgiving, and stop disappearing. And it was absolutely excruciating. The first time I set a boundary, I felt sick, like I'd done something terribly wrong, like I didn't deserve to take up that kind of space. But somewhere underneath the guilt, there was the tiniest flicker of relief. And that flicker grew. I had to start to grieve the version of me that had survived by pleasing people. I had to make peace with the idea that not everyone would like this new version of me, the real me, and it was so uncomfortable. But I started to see that healing wasn't about arriving at some perfect destination. It was about becoming more and more honest with myself, with others, and with life. Recovery didn't feel like flying. It felt like planting my feet on the ground for the first time. Shaky, uneven, and quite often collapsing back into old patterns, but it was real. And at some point I stopped focusing on food and started focusing on truth. And truth is very rarely gentle at first. Because the more I healed, the more I saw what was underneath. It wasn't just about body image or control or perfectionism. They were all surface symptoms. What lay beneath was the aching core of it all. Codependency, childhood fantasy, and the desperate search for unconditional love. As a little girl, I'd built an entire internal world around the belief that if I was just good enough, just quiet enough, just helpful enough, pleasing enough, then maybe one day, unconditional love would arrive. That mythical, unshakable, unconditional love I had never known how to ask for. I thought if I just kept trying, kept performing, kept being the version of me that everyone seemed to want, that maybe I'd be worthy of it. But healing showed me the painful truth that love, that kind of love, was never, ever going to come from the places I'd been looking. And the moment I realised that, it fucking broke my heart. I had to let the fantasy die. The little girl in me did not go quietly. She screamed, she kicked, she pleaded, because that story had kept her going. And the stories are not the same as truth. The truth was, if I wanted unconditional love, I was going to have to learn how to give it to myself. And that's when the real work began. I started to become my own parent, not just in a conceptual way, but a real, practical, lived way. I learned to sit with my inner child, to listen, to soothe, to reparent, and to stop abandoning her in moments of fear or shame. And that meant learning how to live in the present, because I began to see just how many of my thoughts were about the future, scenarios, fears, possibilities, rejections, fantasies, and none of them were real, because they were all stories, because we can't know what the future's going to bring. And even though those stories felt true, deeply, viscerally true, I had to learn to question them, to ask, is this reality? Or is this a survival story that I wrote when I was 5? It was disorientating but liberating, because once I realised the stories weren't the truth, I could stop living inside them. Part of letting go of those old stories meant setting boundaries, big ones, unfamiliar ones, especially in the relationships that had kept me locked in those patterns, like the one with my mum. Breaking that codependency felt like cutting off a part of myself. Saying no to someone I'd spent my entire life trying to please was agonizing, and it didn't go smoothly. People pushed back, of course they did, because they didn't ask for this change. They were used to the old me, the agreeable one, the overfunctioner, the fixer. I was the one doing the changing, and change, even a healthy change, makes people uncomfortable. I had people question me, pull guilt trips on me, push against my nose. And every time I second-guessed myself. Am I being too harsh? Am I really selfish? Am I being a problem here? But deep down, I think I knew the truth, that they weren't reacting to me. They were reacting to the unfamiliar. And I had to keep choosing me, even when it made other people uncomfortable. And this was empowerment, but not in the glossy sense. This was gritty, aching, quite often nauseating growth. And in the rubble of what I used to believe, I started to build something new. Not perfect, far from perfect, but real. I no longer was chasing love. I was learning how to live in it, one moment, one choice, and one boundary at a time. And then there's a moment in recovery that no one prepares you for. And it's not just about food or weight or fear. It's about desire. And for me, it started with sex. In the beginning, I couldn't let my husband touch me. Not out of rejection, but out of shame. I could not comprehend how he would possibly find me attractive. I couldn't understand how this bigger, softer, unfamiliar body could ever be wanted. So I shut him down. I kept him at a distance because the fear of being seen was far too great. And of course that created tension. There were arguments, hurt feelings, mismatched needs. He longed for closeness and I just wanted to disappear. But slowly, very slowly, I began to let a little closeness in, a hand on my back, a kiss that lingered, a moment of softness instead of turning away. And then something happened that caught me completely off guard. My libido came roaring back. and the desire I hadn't felt in years suddenly lit up like wildfire. It wasn't subtle or gradual, it came back with urgency like extreme hunger, but for intimacy. And in that moment, something clicked because my body had done this before. Just like the cravings for food that had once terrified me, deep, relentless pull towards the foods I'd forbidden for years, this also was my body trying to help me heal, just like the edema that kept me still. This was the whisper of extreme hunger, but not just for food, but for life, for connection, for touch, for pleasure, for being fully in my body instead of living above it. And just like with the food, I was scared, but my body got louder than the fear. I started to want sex more than I wanted to hide. I wanted closeness more than I wanted safety and smallness. And that desire, although I did feel shame around it, it saved me because it reminded me that my body isn't broken. It's wise, it's resilient, and it's always been trying to bring me back to life. And even when I didn't know I could trust it, it stayed with me. It supported me, and somewhere along the way between the tears and the cravings and the boundaries and the breakdowns, I touched something deeper than healing, something that I'd never expected to find in recovery, something spiritual. It wasn't about religion or rituals. It was a quiet knowing, a whisper of truth that I just felt deep inside me, that I was part of something greater, something ancient and sacred, and something that connects us all. Because for so long, basically my entire life, I'd believed I was alone, cut off, isolated, defective, rotted inside, the only one who couldn't get it right. But through recovery and learning, the walls that shame had built began to soften. And as they softened, I started to realize that I'm not separate. None of us are. That beneath all our coping, all our perfectionism, all our fear, we are all the same, really. We're human, we're tender, we're brave, and we're trying our hardest to just come home to ourselves. And at the very core of that remembering was the truth that love is all there is. Not the kind of love you earn, not the kind you perform for, not the kind that's conditional or scarce, but the love that just is. The love that says you're already enough, you've always been enough, you don't have to do a single thing to deserve it. That kind of love isn't something I had to go out and find. It was something I needed to uncover, to remember, because it was always there, buried under layers of fears and stories and survival. And with that love came something else, choice. I realized that no matter how powerless I had felt, no matter how deep the pattern or how loud the voice in my head, I always have a choice. A choice to nourish, a choice to rest, a choice to speak gently to myself, a choice to come back to this moment instead of escaping into fear or fantasy. And some days the choices felt impossible, but even then they were still my choices. And that was one of the most sacred discoveries of all, because I realized I'm not a prisoner of my past. I'm not a slave to fear. I'm not broken or wrong or too much or not enough. I am love. I am choice. And I am part of something greater. And I get to choose again and again, every moment, every breath. Recovery didn't return me to who I was before the eating disorder. It led me to someone I had never even met before. Someone stronger, softer, and truer. And freedom didn't land like a lightning bolt. I didn't wake up one morning and everything was okay. It came slowly, moment by moment, choice by shaky choice. It looked like sitting with discomfort instead of numbing it. It looked like choosing to eat when I just wanted to disappear. It looked like saying no when everything inside me was wired to say yes. And it looked like telling the truth, quietly, fiercely, and staying with myself when others didn't like it. And now I live in a body I trust, not because it's perfect, but it's mine, and it speaks to me, and I listen. And now I treat myself with the kindness I used to only give to other people. And I know I'm good enough, full stop. I don't need to earn that. I don't hustle for it. It just is. I love who I am, not just when I'm doing well, not just when I'm proud, but even on the hard days, even when I make mistakes, actually, especially when I make mistakes. Because now I know how to stay with myself and I know how to choose myself. And that's the thing I want you to know, because freedom isn't about never struggling again. It's about knowing who you are when you do. It's not about reaching some perfect, healed version of yourself. It's about becoming someone who's honest, present, and real. Someone who can hold joy and pain at the same time and feel it all and still choose to stay. So if you're in the thick of it, if recovery feels far away or your body feels unfamiliar and fear shouts louder than hope, it won't always feel like this. There is life on the other side. Not just functioning, not just surviving, but living, loving, laughing, choosing, feeling, and becoming. You will not regret choosing recovery, not once, for a second. Because this freedom, this steady, honest, soul-deep freedom is worth every single tear, every bite, every boundary, and every beginning again. And it's waiting for you, no matter how hard it's been. You still get to choose, and you are worth choosing every time. I didn't become a recovery coach because I studied it in a textbook. I became a coach because I lived it, because I walked through the fire of an eating disorder and came out the other side, not untouched, but transformed, because I know what it feels like to be trapped in your own mind and terrified of your own body. And I also know what it feels like to be free. That's why I do this work. It's why I show up every day for women walking the same path I once walked. It's why I created the Eating Disorder Recovery Circle, a space I would have given anything for when I was deep in it. A space where you don't have to pretend, where you can come exactly as you are, where recovery isn't about weight or food, but about the healing the whole of you. Your voice, your worth, your identity, your inner child, your relationships. Inside the circle, you'll find coaching, connection, community, challenges, and courses to guide you through every stage of recovery. And for those who are ready to go even deeper, for the people who want more personalized support, more structure, more healing at the roots, I also do one-to-one coaching. It's intimate, tailored, and transformational. Together we'll uncover the deeper stories that drive your behaviors. We heal what's underneath, not just what's on the surface. And I walk beside you, holding your hand every step of the way, as you build a life that's bigger than the eating disorder ever allowed. So if anything in my story resonated, if you saw yourself in these words, if something inside you whispered, maybe there's more for me too, I want to invite you to reach out. You don't have to do this alone. You were never, ever meant to. And whether it's through the circle or private coaching, I'm here. Not to fix you, not to push you, but to help you find you again. Because no matter how far gone you feel, no matter how long you've struggled, you are never beyond hope. And you are always, always allowed to choose something better. This life is still yours, and I would be honored to help you reclaim it. Thank you for listening today. It was a very emotional episode, and I don't even know, I don't even have words now. I will see you all next week. I'm sending you so much love.